Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. You are watching and listening to Historian Radio's Echoes of the News, and I am Mohammed Hussain Qazi, and these are today's headlines from the past. On this day, the 16th of November 1848, Frédéric Chopin gave his final public performance at London's Guildhall. It is unfortunate that one of the greatest names in the history of Western classical music would have given his final performance while battling illness, and it would be before a disinterested audience who spent most of the time at the refreshment areas of the Guildhall. Nevertheless, while that audience did not give Chopin his due credit or the due response, people today who are interested in classical music and its history definitely applaud Chopin and Chopin's work, unlike the disinterested audience of 1848. Continuing on this date, in 1907, Oklahoma became the 46th state to join the United States of America. Truly a significant date in the history of the formation of what is today the Union of States of what it was then the Union of States of America and is now the United States of America. One nation and one flag. And moving forward, on this day in 1917, Georges Clemenceau became the Prime Minister of what was then wartime France. Clemenceau led the nation during the period of the First World War and was the signatory on the Treaty of Versailles on the behalf of France in his capacity as one of the victor of nations. That is to say, one of the triumphant nations who won and, of course, signed the Treaty of Versailles, which would impose sanctions and other reparations on the powers of Imperial Germany and Austria-Hungary and the Ottoman Empire. Nevertheless, Georges Clemenceau is best remembered as one of the statesmen who steered France through the horrors of the First World War, particularly so at its peak. Moving forward, on this day in 1959, The Sound of Music was performed for the first time on Broadway starring Mary Martin, and the show would run 1,443 performances. I must confess, I myself am a Sound of Music aficionado. And so, for me and many other fans of The Sound of Music, its performance on Broadway on this day in 1959 is truly a significant date. And lastly, in 1965, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, also known as the Soviet Union, launched an unmanned spacecraft titled Venus 3, which would land on Venus. This would be a significant moment in the history of the space race, as this would be one of the first times, well, in a long list of times to come, when an unmanned spacecraft would be sent to land on a planet. While today it is an all too common phenomena, in the 1960s this was the pinnacle of groundbreaking scientific achievement. And on that note, we conclude today's headlines of the day. Now we move on to the next segment of our show, where we recount the famous births and deaths of famous figures from the 19th and 20th centuries and sometimes earlier. Born on this day in 42 BC was Tiberius Claudius Nero, the second emperor of Rome, succeeding Augustus in AD 14, who improved and strengthened the principate but was depicted as cruel and perverted by historians. He is in fact best remembered in the following line, that while Rome burned, Nero played the fiddle. Truly, he remains to be a controversial figure in the history of the Roman Empire. He would be born on this day, the 16th of November, 42 BC. And following his birth in the field of controversial political individuals was Oswald Mosley, who was born in 1896. Mosley was successively a Conservative and Labour Member of Parliament before forming the British Union of Fascists. He would be the leader of provocative marches through the Jewish East End of London prior to the Second World War, and it had led to major confrontations. He was interned during the war and later lived in exile in France. He remains to be one of the most hated characters in the history of British politics, who formed effectively what was the British version of the Nazi Party. And unfortunately, on this day in 1960, Clark Gable, one of the most iconic faces of old Hollywood, would pass away. On this day, the 16th of November 1960. He is best remembered for his roles in films such as Gone with the Wind and Mogambo. And following his death in 1981, famous American actor William Holden would also breathe his last. And on that unfortunate note, we conclude today's headlines of the day. You were watching and listening to Historian Radio's Echoes of the News, and I am Muhammad Hussain Qazi, and these are today's headlines as history first heard them. Good night.